Everyone is made up of events in their past, and it forms walls around one's spirit or breaks such walls down. The mind makes some powerless and gives strength to others.
In the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim DLC Dawnguard, we meet the vampire Serana. Serana is a pure-blood vampire called a Daughter of Coldharbour. The transformation makes her immortal and quite powerful, but everything comes at a price. In this video, we're going to examine a bit of Serana's psychology, the conflicts her vampirism is causing within her, and how and why she can be convinced to become human again. When you first meet Serana, it's in a long-forgotten underground ruin where she's been sleeping. The significant passage of time seems to have little to no effect on a vampire's mental state.
Empire? What empire? Cyrodiil is the seat of an empire? I must have been gone longer than I thought.
However, this doesn't mean that a vampire, even a pure-blooded one, is immune to issues regarding mental health and everyday psychological states. It's addressed throughout the DLC, with the Pharaoh vampire who was driven mad after being exiled from the Volkihar clan, with the prophecy making Harkon and Valerica spiral into obsession, and with Serana herself. At a certain point, you can question Serana about becoming a vampire. You can ask her if she regrets becoming a vampire.
Nobody's ever asked me that before. I don't know. I think mostly I hate what it's done to my family.
When talking about how it's affected her family, she brings up how it eventually led to her parents' insanity and her getting locked underground. But what she says at the end sums it all up.
It's definitely been a bad thing, on the whole.
It could simply be a matter of improper choice of word, but if you ask her if she's ever thought about curing herself, she's offended.
A cure? Why even think of it that way? I can't think of any reason I'd want to lose this gift, especially after what I did to get it. It may have driven my family apart, but I'm still here, and I'm alive. I won't give this up.
The implication of your question being that vampirism, even one of pure blood like her, is a disease and therefore an inherently negative thing. In the span of about a minute, she has referred to vampirism as being an overall detriment to her life, and also calling it a gift. Cognitive dissonance is a psychological state that's become quite popular to cite in recent years. Here to explain further, we have someone who's actually trained in the science of psychology, and is also an outstanding variety streamer over on twitch.tv, Musiał.
Cognition is knowledge and comprehension. Among other things, it's thoughts, attitude, values, and behavior. What is referred to as a cognitive dissonance is the discomfort you feel when two cognitions are incompatible. In Serana's case, she admits that the tradition of vampirism has had an overall detrimental effect on her and her family. It drove her parents to being actively and physically hostile to one another, and led to Serana herself being buried underground for centuries.
My father's not exactly the most stable, and eventually he drove my mother crazy with him. And it all ended with me being locked underground for who knows how long.
When the idea of treatment is brought up, the dissonance is clear to see. She calls it a gift, despite expressing that's been a net negative for all involved. In her attempt to relieve the distressing feelings, she rationalizes. It's not a disease, it's who I am. It destroyed my family, but I went through too much to just give it up. I'm still alive, that's what matters. Understand that cognitive dissonance is not an inherently negative thing. Everyone experiences it, and as we can see with Serana, the Dragonborn can help her address it in a healthier manner, motivating her to make positive changes in her life.
It's interesting to me that she gets offended at the word cure in relation to her vampirism. You can see how much she considers vampirism to be a part of her identity. She's been one for a very long time, but she still remembers a time when she was only human.
The ceremony was degrading. Let's not revisit that. But we all took part in it. Not really wholesome family activity, but I guess it's something you do when you give yourselves to a Daedric lord.
You can compare her condition in several ways. In a way, it's similar to having a disability, like someone who was either born deaf or lost their hearing but refuses cochlear implants, due to the condition becoming a major aspect of their identity. She seems to view her current state as being more comparable to a sexual orientation or perhaps something psychological akin to autism. There is no cure for these because they're not diseases. At most, we may label them as disorders, but name them whatever you want. These traits don't inherently make anyone violent or dangerous to anyone. This isn't the case for a vampire. Vampires feed on man and myrrh for sustenance. You may argue that Daughters of Coldharbour don't require blood to survive, but the communities they build and worship the Molag Bal do. And despite Serana having a stigma against the word cure, vampirism does spread very much like an infectious disease. If we're purely taking Serana's point of view into account, then it's reasonable for her to become upset at the suggestion of a cure. And it's that emotional reaction that makes her become adamant on her stance that vampirism is part of who she is, that there's nothing wrong with it, and there's nothing that should be done about it, making it so you can never revisit the conversation and convince her to become human again.
I'm not talking about this with you anymore.
But there is one more thing that you can compare her condition to, and it leads into how and why you're able to convince Serana to remove her vampirism.
And the greatest of victories are not manipulations at all, but simply awakening others to the truth of what you believe, of hearing it echoed around you in life.
A favorite method of mine to place what Kreia is saying here into practice is to avoid making statements and instead ask questions, sometimes genuine, sometimes leading questions. Analyze what they're saying and how they say it. Then phrase your disagreements in the form of a question, otherwise known as the Socratic method. In order to convince Serana to renounce her vampiric state, all you have to do is simply ask her if she's alright.
I will be. Just give me a little time.
If you pick this dialogue option, then after the main quest line on the Dawnguard side, you can broach the subject again and convince her to remove her vampirism.
Like myself, Serana was a human once. We were devout followers of Lord Molag Bal. Tradition dictates the females be offered to Molag Bal on his summoning day. Few survive the ordeal. Those that do emerge as a pure-blooded vampire. We call such confluences the Daughters of Coldharbour.
In Season 8, Episode 10, entitled Ritual, of the procedural crime drama Law & Order, they tackled a highly sensitive topic of clitoridectomy, female circumcision, or female genital mutilation, as it's called by the World Health Organization. That is where I was first exposed to the practice. If you don't know what it is described as the ritual cutting or removal of some or all of the external female genitalia. Although the complete procedure does vary, but I won't get into that at the risk of it being too graphic. It is a cultural practice that is prevalent in Northern Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. This may come as a shock to those in Western society, but in many cases, it's the women who seek for this procedure to be done to their daughters.
It was expected of her, just as it was expected of me. Being selected as an offering to Molag Bal is an honor. She wouldn't have dared turn her back on that.
This is not abuse. It is a family matter. She is not helping. She will bring disgrace to our family.
You have to understand, this is a very old practice, very ingrained within the culture. In comparison, it isn't until very recently that major opposition to the practice came from people within the cultures themselves. Asking Serana if she was alright makes her do some introspection.
The ceremony was degrading.
It was expected of her.
It's definitely been a bad thing, on the whole.
Tradition dictates the females be offered to Molag Bal on his summoning day. Few survive the ordeal.
Until now, Serana never thought to question what was done to her.
It is because family exerts a powerful influence on one's development.
You weren't going to convince her by making her feel like a monster or a defective human. Just by asking if she's alright must have gotten her thinking. Was I really alright with what my own parents made me do? A ceremony that could have killed me. A ceremony in which
I suffered indignities.
How could you love me and do this to me?
all to turn me into a creature that society fears and despises.
Sometimes a momentary insight is worth lifetimes of experience.
Serana underwent a traumatic experience for this state of being at the behest of her parents. Her autonomy was taken away from her, both mentally and physically. So of course she would decide to remove the vampirism in an effort to take back control of her own life.
There you are. I'm back. All clean.
Her words resembled that of a former addict, perhaps indicative of the cost of all that vampiric power and immortality. People generally have no desire to die, and it is a frightening prospect. Immortality has always been a theme explored within our stories, and many still dream of it. But perhaps it's our very mortality that makes us appreciate our lives and the time we have.
I feel like I can breathe again for the first time since I was turned. The world is alive, and so am I for once.